The Time Traveler's Guide to Not Getting Caught. Chapter 8. That Time I Met Another Time Traveler. I know what you're all wondering, and the answer is yes. Yes, I did. I did get home and watch Gladiator on Showtime because I said I would, and then after that, I watched Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Part 1, even though I didn't want to because I had to watch the first part before I watched Part 2, and then I watched Part 2. Oh, that isn't what you were wondering? Oh, you want to hear about that guy that disappeared in front of me? Well, it turns out he's another time traveler. But I didn't know for sure. So I'm in the Renaissance and I see this guy disappear, and I have no clue who it is. But I know it isn't me because I can spot my ass from a mile away. Yeah, sure, I didn't know it was me when I went back in time to the nightclub in New York. But in my defense, it was dark. So anyway, I decided to go back home and, like I said before, watch the movies on my list. So after I watch my movies and eat a Celeste pizza, I think about this disappearing guy and I think, well, if he is a time traveler, where would I most likely find him in time? Because the only way I'd ever find him again is if I met him at a famous moment in history. So I open up Internet Explorer and do a search of the biggest catastrophes in human history because if I was going to find a needle in a haystack, the needle would most likely be found right before some major horrible thing. So the Hindenburg comes up, but I'm like, nah, at least for now. But then I see one of the most tragic moments of all time, the destruction of Pompeii. If this time traveler wanted to visit big moments in history, he would be going to Pompeii. So I open Firefox and I search what people wore in Pompeii. And as it turns out, they wore togas again. So I pull off my bedsheet to re-toga my old toga when I stop myself and decide to go to sleep first. See, I was learning from my mistakes. So I wake up and I look up when Pompeii was destroyed, but as it turns out, historians don't know for sure the actual date, but after doing a search on Chrome, the best guess is August 24th in the year 79 AD. So I figured the time traveler would start with that day. So I enter the dates in tubes, and I find myself in Pompeii before it all got blown away. And I was very pleased I wasn't knee-deep in molten magma. Or is it lava? After getting back home, I binged it, and it turns out it's lava. Magma is when it's underground, but after the volcano explodes, the magma becomes lava. Thanks, Bing. So anyway, luckily I got to Pompeii before I got lava'd. Now you might think it would be difficult for me to find another time traveler in Pompeii. But if he's anything like me, he was going to keep the watch on at all times. I mean, sure, some people gave me weird glances in Athens when I was in my toga and watch, but people really don't know what a smartwatch is in the olden times. They just think it's some sort of decoration. So I start walking through Pompeii and my first thought was, well, this smells worse than that New Delhi train. And my second thought was, am I standing in sewage? And that's when I realized that I was in fact walking in the street, which also serves as the city's toilet and dumpster all in one. So I promptly get out of the street and I hop onto the sidewalk and I head up to the city towards the top of the mountain. And as I'm walking up, I pass a brothel. Or at least what I figured was a brothel because it was filled with naked women waving me in. And even though I really wanted to check it out, I had a mission at hand and my mission was to find that time traveler. But then I thought, well, maybe the time traveler was in the brothel. So I go into the brothel and an hour later I realize he isn't in there. And so I resume heading towards the top of the city. And then I finally reach the peak and I look down at the beautiful city and I think, I'm glad I'll never get melted by lava. And that's when I see a guy in a Calvin Klein toga and a smartwatch on his wrist. At first I thought, yay, I found the time traveler. And then I thought, well, what if he doesn't like me? I mean, for all I knew, this was the only other time traveler I would ever meet and I didn't want him hating me. So I stood there for way too long thinking about the different things I could say to him, and then I fixed my hair and approached him as he was admiring one of the city statues. At first he didn't look over at me, he just continued staring at the statue. And that's when I said, that's a nice statue. At first I thought, that wasn't the first thing I wanted to say. And then I thought, what if he didn't like the statue and thinks I have bad taste now? So the guy turns to me with wide eyes and points at me. And my eyes widen and I nod my head like Jack Nicholson in Anger Management. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just look up the GIF right now. Seriously, look it up because I'm not going to continue until you do. Okay, I'm not sure if you actually looked it up or not, but I'm just going to assume you did, and I'll continue with my story. So then he says, time traveler? And I say, yeah. And he says, no way. And I say, I know. Crazy, right? And he says, totally crazy. And I say, I saw you in the Renaissance. And he says, did you see Leonardo da Vinci's dick? And I say, yeah, what's up with that? And then he says, I got Pompeii money. You want to get some food? And I say, sure. So we go to a nearby restaurant and order some food, and we start to talk about our travels. And I ask him, what cool places should I travel to? And he says, well, have you traveled back to caveman time yet and had sex with a cave woman? And I say, yeah, it was totally awesome. And he says, did you use a condom? And I say, no, but I should have. And he says, yeah, you should have, or at least pulled out. And then we start to talk about time and quantum physics. And I ask him if he made his time traveling device or found it somewhere. And he says he found it in a park, and I told him I found mine behind a dumpster. And then he wondered if we had two separate time traveling devices or actually had the same one. So I ask him, how would you know if we have the same one? And he says, his has a scratch mark on the bottom of the watch when he found it. And so we both take off our watches and check the bottom of the watch, and we have identical scratches. And that's when we realize we both have the same time-traveling device. So I ask him why he ditched our watch behind a dumpster, and he says, I don't know, I haven't done it yet. And then he adds, maybe you ditched our watch in the park. So then I ask, wait, did you have the watch before me, or did I have it before you? But neither of us knew. And then he says, well, we have to make sure that if we ever decide to ditch the watch in the future, that you have to ditch it in my park on the day I find it, and I have to ditch it behind the dumpster when you find yours. And then we both wondered at the same time if we both had the watches before and after the other person, and if we were part of some sort of paradoxical loop. So we finish up our meal, and then we go to the brothel. And then we head back to the top of the mountain, and we stare out at Mount Vesuvius, and it just puts everything in perspective, you know? Like here we are in this huge city with all these people, and that volcano right over there was gonna explode any day now and just wipe out that entire brothel. So we watch the sunset together, and then he turns to me and he says, do you regret anything you've done in your travels? And I say, well, I impregnated a cave woman, but I wouldn't say that I regretted it that much. And he looks at me and he says, could you do me a favor? And I say, of course I can. I mean, if it isn't that big of a favor. And then he says, I've done things throughout time that I thought was right in the moment, but now I think they're wrong. I was trying to make right what once went wrong, like Quantum Leap, you know? And then, of course, we talked about how great Quantum Leap was until it got dark out, and then we found a place to sleep, and the next day we walked back up to the mountain to the same spot to finish our conversation. He tells me he tried to do good but wound up doing bad, and he asks me if I had tried the same, and I say, yeah, sure I have. And he says, when you travel through time, you can't go back and change things you've already changed because you might touch yourself and implode, because the same matter can't occupy the same space. At least that's what I've learned from Time Cop. And then, of course, we talk about how great Time Cop is, but then he gets serious and he asks me if I would go back to certain moments in time that he changed and change them back to their original history. And I say, well, that's a lot to ask, especially because I hardly know you. And he says he'd owe me, so I said, I guess I could do it. Because to be honest, I was running out of ideas what to do traveling through time, and I figured this might be entertaining at the very least. So he writes down a list of dates and tudes and descriptions of what he's changed, and he tells me when I go to these times to make sure to be careful if I ever have an interaction with him directly, because it might ruin everything. And I say, all right, I'll be discreet. But then I ask, wouldn't we already know if I was successful, since I would have already done it? And he says, I don't know, I've never met another time traveler. But maybe the next time we meet each other, we can discuss what realities we remember. And I say, maybe it's like frequency, where we get flooded with new memories every time we change history? And he says, yeah, let's go with that. So he thanks me and he tells me when I'm done rewriting history that we should meet up again at a time and place and talk about all of our adventures, and we look at each other, and at the same time, we say, the Titanic. And then he shakes my hand and is about to leave, but I stop him, and I ask him one place he hasn't gone yet that he wants to go, and he says, the first ever Thanksgiving. And then he enters the info into his watch and disappears. So I look down at the list, at the many places I would soon be visiting, and the places are... Wait, why would I tell you? Then you wouldn't want to hear the rest of my story. I'll just say this. Some of the places are good, like really good. And some of the damage he did was bad, like really bad. And now it was my time to go Sam Beckett everything and put right what once went wrong. Well, I guess technically things were already wrong and he tried to make them less wrong but only made them worse. So I guess I was going to put wronger back to wrong. That's what I was going to do. Put wronger back to wrong. Thanks for listening, and please subscribe and rate the podcast to help me get more of the positive attention I so sorely need. Follow the show on Instagram at Time Traveler's Guide Podcast and me at Anonymous Time Traveler 69. New episodes out Thursday nights at 8.